Hi there and welcome back. This is Jennifer McGuire and I hope you're having a good week. I've gotten many requests to do a video on colored pencils since I haven't done one in a while. Well, today I'm going to share lots of colored pencil techniques, including coloring on dark colored cardstock and a fun and different way to use Gamsol to help blend your colored pencil. Now, I want to say up front that I am by no means an expert at colored pencils. I'm just going to show you how I use them. And for me, I struggle with coloring, so I just have some tips that make it easier and faster, and I hope they're helpful to you. I also have several examples for you. I think sometimes it's best to learn by seeing different types of images colored. So I'll have 4 different cards for you today. But first, I wanted to talk about 2 different colored pencils I've been using a lot lately. If you want to skip this part, you can, but I really like these 2 brands, and I want to talk about how they're similar and different. So the first is the Polychromos colored pencils. Now, Polychromos are ones that crafters have been using for a while. This is an extremely high quality colored pencil. Now, as I mentioned, am not an expert, but let me tell you what I know about these pencils. They are oiled base, so you don't get that wax bloom effect that you get with some colored pencils, such as Prismacolored, which are wax-based. So you can layer these together quite nicely. However, these pencils are fairly translucent. That means you can kind of see through them when you apply them. That doesn't matter if you're coloring on white. They'll show up perfectly on white. However, if you want to color onto a darker color of cardstock, these are a little bit translucent, so they don't come out as intense on darker colors of cardstock. What I love about the Polychromos is they don't break. I used Prismacolor for many years and I still think they're great pencils. But I started to have problems with breakage, and I know many other people did too. That's why I switched to the Polychromos, and I've been very happy with them. The price point on these are higher than many other colored pencils, but you always get what you pay for, and this is an excellent quality. But keep in mind, many of the colored pencil techniques that I use, you can use with other colored pencils. And keep in mind, there are many size packs available of the Polychromos. I have a larger set here, but you definitely can get a lot out of a much smaller set. You can always layer and blend together to create more colors. The other type of color pencil I wanted to talk about today are the Caran Luminance Pencils. I learned about these pencils several years ago from my friend Lydia. She is an expert with these, and I will link to her YouTube channel below. Definitely check her out. Now, these pencils I would call the best of the best from what I've heard. They are the best color pencil. However, I'm going to tell you up front, they have a higher price point. We're talking about, like, these are the Copic markers of colored pencils. However, since they have a higher price point, they have a lot more to offer than most colored pencils do. These are wax-based pencils, kind of like Prismacolor. However, you don't get the bloom, the wax bloom that you can get with other wax-based pencils. These offer a creamy blending without breaking. I've never had any breakage problems with these. And these are more opaque, whereas the Polychromos are kind of translucent. You can kind of see through them. These are very opaque. So you can color bright colors on dark colored cardstocks, which I think is so much fun. Also, because they are so creamy and so great for coloring and getting smooth results, you can blend with them really nicely. And you can even layer light colors on top of dark. So the reason I like using them, besides that I can use them on dark colored cardstock, is that these are forgiving because you can keep layering and kind of cover up the color you had already put down. You can kind of change your mind. There's a softness to these that is beautiful. There's great surface coverage. They're very concentrated color and very vivid. And you can erase them quite nicely with a regular eraser. And remember, I have the Big Mama set here, but you definitely could get away with the smallest set of the Luminance pencils because you can layer and blend them to create whatever look you want. And I believe the smallest set does come with that white. Now, I know all that information is baloney without actually seeing coloring done with them. So let's just compare the 2 here on a dark colored cardstock to start with. Then we'll do a white cardstock. This is the Polychromo. You can see it goes down beautifully. We don't have breakage issues. And then here's a similar color from the Luminance. I tried to get a close color. You can see that this is more opaque, so you don't see the blue background through it as much. So it turns out much more vibrant. Here's another color sample. This is another blue pencil from Polychromos. And on the right here, we have the Luminance. So the Polychromos do work on the dark colored cardstock, but not as intense. And you get more of a matte finish instead of shiny with the Luminance instead of the Polychromos. But really, I like both of them. So let's do a bit of blending. I wanted to show you that you can blend nicely with both of them. So we did Polychromos over there on the left. Here's the Luminance on the right. I put down one color. Let's come in with the second color, and you can see you can get blending just by going over what you've already done and then coloring next to it. So that's one of the nice things about having a high quality pencil is that you can layer colors, blend easily. But I am, as you see here, getting better results on the dark color cardstock with the Luminance pencil. Now here's where you see a really wow difference. There I put down the Polychromo white pencil. Here is a Luminance white pencil. You can buy the white Luminance pencil separately. So you could buy this separately and look how intense it is on that dark color cardstock. It's almost solid white on top of it. Prismacolor isn't that bright white. You definitely get best results on dark cardstock from the Luminance. Okay, now next I wanted to talk about Gamsol, and then we'll talk about white cardstock with colored pencils. Now Gamsol is a product that is used to blend together different colors of colored pencil to get nice smooth transitions. Gamsol is an odorless mineral spirit. Now just because it's odorless doesn't mean you should really keep it in open containers in your craft room. You want good ventilation because this stuff I don't think you really want to be sniffing too much. However, it's a fantastic product, and I find I get much better results with this than baby oil and some other things that other folks like to use. This really is the best for blending. Now let's look at colored pencils on the white cardstock, and then we'll talk about the Gamsol that you can use with them. This is the Polychromo here. I'm putting down kind of a magenta color, then I'm coming in with a blue color, and you can see how you can scribble these next to each other and then blend them together by overlapping. And if you just work it a little bit, keep coloring a bit more, you can get a nice blended result without using any Gamsol. However, many people, including myself, like to use Gamsol to make the blending faster and smoother. So I take this little bottle from Inky Antics and I touch this paper stump to it. That's that thing that I have in my hand there like a pencil. It picks up some of the Gamsol and then I color it on top of my colored pencil, and it helps to blend it and smooth it out. It really makes a big difference. Over on the left there is some sandpaper where I can sand the color off of the paper stump so I can keep using it. Another nice way to use Gamsol is when you want to take one color and make it kind of fade out into white. So here I just quickly scribbled down some magenta, use the Gamsol, and watch this. I can make it fade out nicely. So it really is a great tool to have with colored pencils. I find that Gamsol works great with my Polychromos and also my Prismacolor pencils. And you can try it with any other colored pencils you may have. Now Luminance, since it blends so easily on its own, you really don't need Gamsol with it, but I wanted to show you can use it if you find it helpful. I like to use my Gamsol with my Luminance if I'm trying to kind of fade out, as you see here. You can see how beautifully that blends, and it just gives gorgeous results. So here let's blend from some pink to some purple, and I'll use the Gamsol. Again, I'm not taking much effort with the colored pencils to get the results. Instead, I'm letting the Gamsol do the work for me. Now the Gamsol with the paper stump and that sanding paper over there, it can be cumbersome sometimes. And also the tip doesn't always stay very sharp. So I actually found an idea from one of my blog readers, and since then I've heard it from some other people too. And that is to put your Gamsol in a refillable pen. So I'm using the Tim Holtz alcohol ink fillable pen. This is a pen with a bullet tip and a brush tip. And you can put in here alcohol ink or blending solution. I've shown that in a video before. I'll link to it here. But today I'm going to fill one with Gamsol. So this pen comes empty. And on the tip with the brush tip, there's this silver ring around it. You pull on that silver ring with some tweezers, and you can actually pull out the brush tip. So you don't want to damage the brush tip itself. You pull on that silver ring, and now you can pour in some Gamsol. I didn't pour much in because I figured I can always go back and add more, and I didn't want to overfill. There are instructions on the side. So after I've put some in, I go ahead and put the tip back in and lay it on its side for a few minutes. This causes the Gamsol to absorb into the two tips. Now I've had one of these pens that I've used for a few months, and it's held up great, and the Gamsol's always there. Now here's the thing, the tip will stain when you use this Gamsol tip with colored pencils, but that's okay. Let me show you how it works. Here I'm putting down some Polychromos, and I'm going to come in with this Gamsol pen that I created, and look how beautifully it blends. Again, the tip will stain, but as long as you scribble the tip off onto scrap paper to remove the excess color, you can switch easily from color to color. Now with the paper stumps, you can really push color around more because it's firm. With this, you're only really lifting and moving around color, and it works wonderfully. And you don't have to worry about having an open can of those odorless mineral spirits on your table. I like that it's contained in the pen. I did write Gamsol on the side of my pen, so I was sure I remembered which of my refillable pens had Gamsol in it. And I've since switched from using that little bottle and the paper stumps to using this. Remember, this pen has a bullet point or a fine tip end to it that really makes using Gamsol in tiny little areas with colored pencils super handy, which you'll see in today's video. So if you're like me and you like using your Gamsol with your colored pencils, you might want to try creating a Gamsol pen because it's a game changer for me. You'll be seeing me use this a lot more in videos now that I have this handy pen that makes it so much easier. And although I focus on these two types of colored pencils today, you can try this with other colored pencils you may have. Okay, so let's start doing some examples. I'm first going to show you how I use the Gamsol pen that I created along with the Luminance colored pencils. For this, I'm using the Gina K Snowbirds stamp set. I love the birds in this. They are perfect for practicing coloring, as the images are pretty big with a bit of detail, but not too much, so you can practice some great coloring with it, and I'll be using that middle bird on two of my cards today. I'm going to stamp both panels right now. I'll stamp that bird with Gina K Black Amalgam ink, which is a Copic marker colored pencil watercolor friendly ink, and I'll stamp it on two colors of cardstock. One is Lawn Fawn Blue Jay cardstock, which you see here, and I'll use that later in this video. And the other is on a white Bristol cardstock. That's my favorite to use with colored pencils, and the Bristol cardstock that I link below is a nice bright white. So let's start with the white one first. I'm using the Luminance pencils to apply a heavy layer of color. Now I'm not worrying about blending much here because I have my Gamsol pen that I've created to blend the colors together. I want to make his wings and kind of the top of his head a blue color, but then his belly white with a little bit of yellow. So I'm starting with the darker color first, adding the lighter colors and blending with the Gamsol. Now you can skip the Gamsol completely with the Luminance pencils because they blend so well and go on so heavy. But if you want to save time, that Gamsol does the blending for you. So all you really have to do is scribble down your colors and then blend with the pen. I do find it best to start with the darker color first, then put down the lighter and then blend them together. You can use your Gamsol pen to drag the color from the darker to the lighter area. Really, you can move the color any way you want. I just find that to be the most effective. So here I'm adding some blue to the top of his head and then some lighter blue above that, and then I'll blend into white. Using the Gamsol, I can easily blend between these colors. The belly is an even better example. Here I'm going to use white, a little bit of yellow, and a little bit of gray so that I can have a white belly with some shadows and just a highlight of yellow. Now, I usually use Copics when I'm doing coloring for any of my cards. The reason I use Copics is because they're pretty fast to use. But with experimenting with this Gamsol pen, I'm actually finding that I might be faster with colored pencils and Gamsol, so I'll be doing more of that in my videos in the future. But you know, it really depends on your personal preference, whether you like to use watercolor, marker, or colored pencil. I struggle the most with watercolor, so you'll most often see me using colored pencils or Copic markers. If I do watercolor, it's usually for a background or a fun technique. Now, I think this bird is a great example to show how really nice it is to have the two different size tips on that Gamsol pen. Here I'm coloring in a beak, and I wanted it to kind of go from dark gray to a dark yellow. Because I have that fine tip on my Gamsol pen, I can easily blend that tiny little area, and that would have been difficult with a paper stump. Another example where that fine tip is helpful is in the branches here. I put down a brown and I felt like it was a little too reddish, so I came in with another color. I can put it right on top and then blend it so that I have a little bit of variation in the color on those branches. Although I used Luminance pencils for this example, you could definitely use the Polychromos or even the Prismacolor pencils that I used to use years ago. You can also try with any other colored pencils that you may have. Okay, let's make a card from the image we just colored. For this one, I went ahead and cut out the bird with the coordinating die. And for the background, I used this reverse confetti diagonal stitches die that I am crazy about. I ran it through my die cut machine as I would with a regular die, and it cuts a piece that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 with faux stitch details going in a diagonal. I then am going to run it through my die cut machine again, but turning the die 90 degrees, and I get this fun cross hatch pattern. I like that I can use this die to get both looks. Next, I'm going to pick my sentiment, which is from the Gina Sweet Friendship stamp set. Currently, you get this free with a $75 purchase over at Gina Designs, but soon this will be available for sale. I love the floral image here, but decided to use this sentiment on this card. The sentiment is a long one, and I wanted it to be shorter, so I'm stacking it. So using my scissors, I'm carefully cutting between words, and now I can arrange it with part of the sentiment on top and part on the bottom, and it can fit into a tighter area. I can always mount these stamps onto my acrylic block how they were originally intended if I wanted to. So I have a piece of that Blue Jay cardstock, and I'm using my anti-static powder tool, stamping the first part of the sentiment with Versamark ink, and then I'll white heat emboss that. Once I'm done, I can add the second part of the sentiment right below it. The reason I don't stamp them together at the same time is that I can get the words closer together if I don't do them at the same time. You know how stamps have a little bit of the clear behind it or around it so that it can stick to your acrylic block? Well, that prevents you from stamping them close together. So by doing one at a time, I can kind of nestle the bottom part of the sentiment up by the top part of the sentiment. Next, I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding white note card. Onto this, I'm adding our die cut crosshatch pattern piece. Then I have my two navy pieces. One will go at the top and one will go at the bottom. And I wanted to add this with dimension. I'm using Gina black foam tape because if you look from the side, you don't see the tape as much since I'm using navy cardstock. Here I'm using my T-ruler to help me make a straight, thin line of Gina Connect glue. And then I'm going to take a super thin strip of gold cardstock. This is just from a scrap, and I'm putting it right up against that T-ruler. This will help me make sure that it's straight and that it doesn't kind of curve as I glue it down. I just thought that would be a nice finishing touch at the top and the bottom of those navy pieces. And finally, I'll add our little bird so it's tucked behind the navy bottom piece, but peeking over the top piece. Here's the finished card. You can see that I kept the card quite simple and clean, so the focus would be on that fun coloring that we did. I do like that faux stitching in the background as it adds a little bit of interest, as does those two super thin strips of gold cardstock. You can see that thanks to that Gamsol, we have nice blending on the bird and on the branch and on the berries. Now remember how I stamped a bird onto the dark blue cardstock? I'll color that later on in this video, but first I wanted to show you a few more examples of using colored pencils on white cardstock. For this example, I'm going to use colored pencils in a very fast way. I'll be using the Simon Says Stamp Love Always stamp set. This is a new large stamp set that's also available in a kit, or you can buy it individually. I really like the long music border that you can use along the edge of a card or stamp repeatedly for a background. And I also really like this floral heart that I'll be using today. I stamped it with Gina K black amalgam ink onto the Bristol white cardstock. After that, I went ahead and started adding some luminance pencils. Again, you can use any of the other colored pencils I mentioned for this. Just as an example, I'm really putting this down quickly. I'm just scribbling down dark green, medium green, and then a bright yellowish green. I could skip the Gamsol and just work with the pencils to get a blended look, but the Gamsol really saves me time. That's what I'm usually looking for when I'm doing coloring. For me, I enjoy making the card and doing the techniques on the card and not so much the coloring, but everybody is different. I wanted my card to have a focal point at that heart. To do so, I put together some Birch Press Adora layering dies. This is a new die set where the 3 dies are sold together. You cut them each from cardstock, glue them together for an incredible layered look. I cut all 3 layers from white cardstock and glued them together, and then onto a white cardstock background. This adds a little bit of interest that draws your eye to the heart, but isn't too distracting since I did everything in white. There is a center part that this die creates. I decided not to use it on this card, but I can use it on a future card. So here's the finished card. I just added it to a peach note card, and then added a simple sentiment in the center that says, "You're in my heart," and that's from a Simon Says Stamp Tiny Words stamp set that I've used many times in videos. So after I did my coloring, everything else is very simple on this card. I also black heat embossed after I did my coloring, and I'm going to show you that later in this video. It makes your colored images stand out even more. Before we go on to coloring on colored cardstock, I have one more example on white cardstock. Now this one I used a new reverse confetti stamp set. This is the Big Bear stamp set with super cute sentiments and images. I thought it would be fun to stamp the bear with the handmade card in his hand. Now for this, I stamped again with Gamsol ink onto a Bristol white cardstock. Now you can use colored pencils on other white cardstocks. I just find Bristol is most effective. Most Bristol cardstocks have an off-white look to them, but the one that I use here has a white color to it, and I'll link to it below. Now in this case, I'm doing super fast coloring. I first scribbled down dark color brown, and now I'm going in with a medium shade. Notice I'm not doing any blending, and I'm not being careful to make sure that my lines aren't showing. I'm just putting down the color quickly. In this case, I'm letting the Gamsol do all the work for me. You could use paper stumps for this, but by using this Gamsol pen, I save time, and I can get into those little nooks and crannies with the bullet tip that's on one end of our pen. It's easy just to switch back and forth between the 2 tips. And here you can see how quickly I blend from the darker brown to the lighter brown on the top of his head. I'm not great at picking areas for shadows or for highlights, but I will tell you that I find the blending with the Gamsol on colored pencil to be just as effective as using Copic markers. Okay, so now I'm going to add a little bit of pink to his ears, and I can blend between the brown and the pink so that I have those soft little ears on top of my little bear. I've shown you many different examples of where that bullet point that's small is very handy to have, but no better example is there than when you have thin areas like the stripes on this scarf. I can put dark purple towards the ends and then just use the Gamsol to blend them in the middle, creating a highlight. Thankfully, the tip of that Gamsol pen is fine enough to fit into these areas. I probably would have had trouble with my paper stumps getting into these fine areas. And by the way, some people like to use baby oil or some other ways to blend together instead of Gamsol. But I find the other options to be quite messy, and I'm really happy with the Gamsol. Just gives much better results for me. Okay, so here is the finished card. I created a layered heart die cut that's white on white, and I'll show you that heart die cut a little bit later in this video. I also stamped Your Berries Special to Me from that same reverse confetti bear stamp set that I showed you earlier. By using an all-white background, I keep the focus on my image and my sentiment. And you can see I was able to color this very quickly thanks to the Gamsol. Okay, now for my last example today, and this is definitely my favorite technique, and that is coloring with colored pencils on a darker colored cardstock. In this case, I'm using the Lawn Fawn Blue Jay cardstock that I showed you earlier in this video, and I've stamped my image with the black Gina Amalgam ink. As we add our color, we'll cover over some of that black ink, but that's okay. I'll show you a trick to make it come back a little bit later. I'll be using my Luminance pencils because I find these work best on dark colored cardstocks, but you could use your other colored pencils. It just won't stand out as much. I'm starting with the yellow and putting that down for that little bit of yellow on his belly. Now, if you want that yellow to be more vibrant, you could first put down white and then put yellow down on top. There you can see I added a lot of white to his belly and how intense that white pencil is on that dark background. There I added a little bit of light gray, a little more yellow, and I'm blending that in with the white. You could use Gamsol when coloring on dark colored cardstock with the Luminance pencils, but I find you really don't need to. If you put down your color heavily and you kind of overlap and blend between the two, you can get great results. And you can see here I'm not really spending that much time. I'm just careful to put down a generous amount of color, and I'm always happy with the results. For the tail, I'm starting with a medium blue, adding a little bit of darker color on top, and then working my way to a lighter blue highlight. Now, here's the thing. I am coloring over the lines here, and that's okay. In this case, I'm using my stamped image kind of as a guide as where to apply the color, not really trying to stay inside of the lines. If I were doing no line coloring, it would take a little more effort. But in this case, we're going to add the outline of the stamped image back on when we're done. Okay, so after I finish my bird, I put down white first onto my berries and then red on top. There are certain colors that look better if you put down white first. Red happens to be one of them. Red doesn't turn out to be as vibrant against dark colors, so I put down white first. So after I finish my coloring, you can tell it's a bird, you can tell some of the details, but many of them are covered by my colored pencil. Here's the way I cheat to make this look good again. I still have my stamp and my MISTI stamping tool in the same position. I'm using my anti-static powder tool, inking up the stamp with VersaFine Onyx black ink, and stamping it on top of my coloring. This is a fine black pigment ink, so I can add clear embossing powder on top and heat set it, so I have a black heat embossed outline. And there we have the detail added in on our bird. You could have skipped this and gone with a no line colored image here where there's no outline to it, but my coloring isn't that good, so I feel better if I put that line back in. Okay, let's add this bird to a card. I wanted to have a large heart window where I could set the die cut bird into it. I'm using the layered heart dies that I used on that bear card earlier. These are also from Birch Press, and when you layer the three together, you get this beautiful layered look. Well, I am going to die cut one of these hearts from white cardstock towards the top center. This will be the window that I'm going to create for my card. I also die cut the heart from some gold cardstock. You can see it there on the top left. I'm going to cut out the insides of this heart just so I have the gold outline alone. This is one of those ways you can get more from your dies by changing up the final look. So after I cut out the inside, I have this fine gold frame. I want that to be inside of our white die cut background. So here's the trick that I'm going to do. I flipped my gold heart over and I flipped my white piece over. I want to tape these together from behind because remember the gold heart sits inside of our window. I'm using Micropore Tape, but Scotch tape or any kind of tape would work. And I'm just taping that fine gold frame inside of the white opening. Now I'm just going to put tape all around it so it's nice and secure there. It takes a few minutes to do this, like 5 minutes, but it's definitely worth it to have that fine gold frame. Okay, I also die cut the heart from some white craft foam. That's the piece that you see here. And this white craft foam piece is slightly smaller than our white cardstock piece. I'm going to glue this behind our white cardstock piece so that it has some nice even raised dimension. You could use pieces of foam tape, but this will survive through the mail much nicer. Okay, before I glue this onto our blue note card, I'm just going to hold it at the center of our blue note card and position our Missing You sentiment. This is from that Gina K friendship stamp set that I showed you earlier. Once I have it positioned, I'll close the door on my MISTI. Then I'll white heat emboss this by stamping it first with Versamark ink, then adding my white embossing powder. I find it easier to do the white heat embossing before we add our white heart-shaped piece on top, because that embossing powder will want to stick everywhere. Okay, so after I heat set this, we can go ahead and glue our white heart piece on top. I like to use Gina K Connect adhesive, a strong liquid adhesive, to glue that craft foam right to the front of our card. And then we can add our bird to this. Now for the bird, I put some foam tape towards the top of him and tuck the bottom part of the bird into the heart. So it looks like he's kind of peeking out from the heart. This really has intense bright color against that dark navy cardstock in real life. It's hard to see in the video. It really is most effective with those luminance pencils, but you definitely can use any other high quality pencil. I hope you'll give these different colored pencil techniques a try. They really are fun to do. And by the way, I will be back with the rest of my favorite crafty things very soon. I just have to get ready for Creativation, which is the big crafting show this weekend. I'll be sharing different things from Creativation over on my Instagram account, which I'll link below if you want to check it out. If you're interested in the supplies I used today, they are linked below in that description. In the middle are a couple other colored pencil videos that you might like. Always, I appreciate you coming by and visiting. I'll see you again soon and have a great week.